In this video, we're going to have a discussion and do some testing on bone, antler, and ivory projectiles. In North America, these projectiles date back to the Paleolithic and run pretty steady all the way into modern times. There's been a fair amount of interest and speculation as to what they were actually used for, so that's what we're going to be focusing on right here in this video. After some of our successful hunts, that's often a good time to test out some new ideas or new projectile points before doing any sort of live animal test. So after we took down these couple of bison in different scenarios, these were perfect opportunities to test out some of these bone, antler, and ivory projectiles, as well as testing simple fire-hardened wooden sticks in the mix as well. Now, before we get too deep into the tests themselves, let's talk first a little bit about the construction so we can have a little bit of context leading into the tests. I think a lot of people rationalize within themselves that bone, antler, and ivory points were probably a lot more commonly used than even stone in many instances, simply because they think, and the average person has a way of believing this, that antler or ivory or bone is easier to work because it's softer than stone, when in reality that's actually not true, because we are not grinding the stone to make a point. It's using breaking the rock, conchoidal fracture, to remove pieces of the rock, which then in turn also make it sharp. That process is actually significantly faster than all the time it takes to split, scrape, and grind bone, antler, or ivory. So there's actually a tremendous amount of work that goes into manufacturing bone, antler, and ivory points. So in terms of times of manufacture, you're really looking at several hours to even a full day to create one of these bone, antler, or ivory projectiles by scraping and grinding, versus it typically taking less than an hour to make a stone projectile. So in many instances, we would be able to make 10 stone projectiles in the same amount of time that it would take to make one bone projectile. Now, I've had the pleasure of being able to make all three of these pin-style projectiles, and so even back, let's say, Paleolithic and even through Archaic, a lot of these are made then with a lap joint sort of attachment, and then in more modern times, while that does still occur to some degree, there's more socketing and just simple pin style that insets into a socket. But either way, the manufacture process is actually quite arduous. So when it comes to working bone, I chose to model mine after an artifact that my friend Michael Bradenbaugh has in his collection, and that's made out of a deer metatarsal or metacarpal. So it's the long cannon bone in the leg of a deer. And so by splitting that out or grinding grooves in it and then splitting it and then simply scraping and working it down, we're able to make one of those relatively easy but still very time consuming, starting from a whole bone. Now when we were working antler's without a doubt the easiest to work, not because it's the softest material, but because they're already in more of a point shape. So if we take something like a white-tailed deer antler that is already straight, now all we have to do is bevel one end and sharpen the other and maybe remove some overall mass. And that sounds like that would be fairly straightforward. The tough part there is actually finding deer antlers that are sufficiently straight. Most have quite a bit of curvature to them, so you'd say, well, we'll just go look for antlers and use those all the time. Well, that's great if you can find them, but what we found is you have to go through a tremendous amount of antlers to find those perfectly straight ones that are going to work perfectly and properly for these projectiles. And then when it comes to ivory points, of course, those are predating the Younger Dryas, so they're in the Ice Age before the extinction of the megafauna. So think about taking a fairly large mammoth or mastodon tusk and then splitting pieces off of that very dense, interwoven ivory, splitting pieces out, scraping it and working it. It is an extremely time-consuming process. So the fact that they were making these, certainly they were using them for a very specific purpose that made it worthwhile spending the time to reduce this material, as opposed to picking up high quality napping stones and removing flakes to make their projectiles. And what you'll probably come to find out in this test is flaked stone projectiles are significantly more efficient and deadly than these pin-style projectiles when hunting animals, especially of significant size. All right, so what we actually have here is
This is real elephant ivory. So we got some a vintage tusk that was donated. We actually didn't get the whole tusk. We got a section of it, but it was actually from a World War II souvenir. So it's the pre-ivory band stuff for whatever that's worth. But so that's real elephant ivory, and these were found at Paleo and even earlier than Clovis, especially earlier in Clovis, sites for hunting megafauna. And so although they don't have the lacerative qualities of stone points, they definitely, you know, can penetrate up in and hurt some stuff. I think stone is preferred without a doubt. However, we're just going to do a couple tests into that carcass and maybe hopefully kind of hit a rib, hit something. We want to see what they do. I kind of have no doubt that we'll penetrate all the way up to the stops here on the cane, and you know, I think we're going to see significant penetration overall. But this is probably the first time that real ivory's been thrown into something, and we were going to use it potentially on the hunt, but for as tough as the hunt has been, we wanted to make sure we let off with stuff that we didn't want to just hole poke. You know what I mean, to run out into this really thick stuff and potentially lose it. So we opted for the stone points and thought if we had to keep putting more in it that I would throw some of these in it as well. But overall, I mean, a carcass test is better than no test at all. So, and then we can always save them, maybe use them on a future hunt as well. What is going on around here? What is going on around here?
That's kind of what happened to mine. That shattered that point.
It did shatter that point. But that hit it right on a dang rib. Right on it.
I'm gonna tell you when Tristan shot.
That shows you how close you can get to losing this. That thing wheeled
like this and it opened up.
I think he hit the shoulder blade.
Shattered it.
It is not easy.
Oh.
Woo!
Yeah. I don't have so much. I mean, you found the sweet spot.
It's exactly what we thought.
I mean, it was
It didn't go. It just went in this far.
Yeah, I didn't think it would because of that transition.
Yep.
Man, it thumped though, didn't it?
Yeah.
Jeez.
I mean, it's the power behind it, but I just.
Yeah.
Ready? Wow.
I was right in the shoulder.
Yeah.
Right in the shoulder.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm not in love with them. That's still amazing that I would just prefer to just throw the dang stone. But yeah, that hit shoulder blade right there.
I mean, you couldn't have found a harder spot since it was something in front of the skull.
Now I can't get it out.
Must have been
Here,
over.
you want this?
Yep. Grab that one too, I don't want to leave that.
Good.
Back up a little bit more. Take the flex out of the dart, is what I'm saying. Not much.
No, it just stuck the point there.
Isn't that crazy?
Got a little bit more penetration there.
Yeah, I mean,
Still sound like
still sounded like it hit rib.
Well, it certainly.
No, it went between them.
Yeah, it may have clipped it on the way in.
It may have.
but
Well,
I think
it's
if
still
it would-
together. I'll throw it one more time. The fact that there's no blade on the spear.
Sure.
It ain't going in.
Same.
It just ain't gonna go in. So at least now I know that. I think if we had to say, well, then why are they found? They may have still, you know, they may have still penetrated better. But if you're throwing every spear you got, these would be good for spearing people or spearing small game or that kind of stuff. And they were certainly used, but penetrative quality is what we're seeing is not great.
How about practice? That's good.
That's it.
That's all you got.
That's all it's got. It goes into there. That's the furthest one. And it's not hitting the rib. So I'll take stone any day. Problems potentially are with this is it's not cutting a wound channel that opens up for penetration. Now that one absolutely hit. Now this one here, when it hit, all it did, I hit, I mean, it must have hit just a rib and stopped. But the problem is, without cutting a wound channel, we're not getting any follow through for the, like a gap cut for the shaft to come through. So I have some more questions to ask about these without a doubt, because I'm not loving the penetrative quality thus far of this. But this is why we run those tests, because had this been live and that happened, I would be a little upset. Anyway, we got some data off of it, but none of them did what I really expected them to do, but I did put that one in the shoulder, and the other one was up high, and then this one, I don't know, it must have just hit a rib, because it hit it back. It wasn't in the shoulder, but it sure enough stopped it. Stopped it hard. So, I don't know.
Now let's revisit this a second. We'll just go back and look at a couple of these. Now obviously we hit a rib on the one and blew it up. We hit shoulder blade on another. We had a few to test for sure. Jason had a few to test. But think about this. Go back and really watch how when we're pulling the points out, they're getting stuck in the hide. They're really wedged into the hide. And so I was completely wrong. I thought that we wouldn't have any issue with penetration. In fact, I thought these would penetrate so easily because there would be so little resistance that they would just stab and slide right in, when in reality, they're not cutting a hole in the hide, they're just wedging their way through the hide. And so yes, they do penetrate perhaps a little bit, but there's so much resistance on the point and the shaft because it's wedging itself rather than cutting a slot or a slit for the rest of the shaft to follow without any friction.
It's not cutting a wound channel that opens up for penetration.
So what this really shows me is that these would be absolutely terrible for hunting any sort of large animals with. You would have almost zero chance of efficiently killing, probably not even killing at all, any of the animals that you would be hunting with this. So this would certainly be used for other applications, smaller animals, or as we'll learn later, also fish. But now just for a comparison, now I'm going to throw a stone pointed, a Clovis pointed foreshaft into the same carcass just to give you a little bit of a point of reference or a comparison or a control compared to how that penetrates versus the ivory points.
Not yet.
There it is.
There it is.
Yeah, you sunk that one up.
Yep, so that's the difference. And it's sunk straight up to, and it's sunk pretty much right up to the foreshaft.
Yep.
Right? Look at that. Look how much penetration that is.
Points intact. Everything.
Points intact. Nice smooth transition. Slid right in like butter.
And then just for fun, in a previous test, we ran a test on just throwing fire-hardened sharpened sticks into the carcass, and you're going to see exactly what happened there. So there's this idea that people are, well, we didn't need any points at all. Well, you saw how the ivory or antler points penetrated, not very well. Then consider wooden points where the tip is a lot softer and it rolls.
Oh, that's a fire-hardened wood tip. Hardened and sharpened. I mean, really, to a needle-sharp tip. Absolutely denied. That's what happens with wood. So everybody's like, oh, they just ran around with sharpened sticks. I've done it on a deer and bounced it off the same way it happened there. This is a big outlaw set. Try it again and see what happens. Maybe get in there. Maybe you hit a rib. I don't know. There's that. That tells you something, though. You know how bad you'd be if you made a whole spear set with sharpened wood points and half of them bounced off?
He's still be chasing that thing right now.
That'd be demoralizing.
Yeah.
You know.
I would still be chasing. Well, I mean, it's good for the kids to practice with.
See if you can't kill that dead animal. All right, that's three.
That was,
off.
that was the right
That was a good one.
So the chances of actually going out and killing real animals with sharpened sticks, and I mean larger animals. Can you kill a rabbit? Sure. But I mean penetrating big animals, and this is thrown off of an atlatl, okay? Pretty much a no chance situation on that. Now what's also interesting is there is an artifact or a set of artifacts from the Sheridan Cave, and the photo credit goes to Pete Bostrom at Lithic Casting Lab, and he's got a great photo here of this projectile and the partial remains of a Platygonus shoulder blade. So Platygonus is a extinct flat-headed peccary, and unlike the picture suggests, the point was not found in the hole of the fragment of the shoulder blade. In fact, it wasn't found in the remains at all, just simply in the vicinity. So one could be led to believe that this was the projectile used to kill the animal, and it very well could have been. We also don't know if it was speared multiple times or if it was speared with a stone point. and also this bone projectile, but being found in the same vicinity and it fits in the hole, it's kind of easy to put those two together. I suppose we'll never really know. Now it's interesting to note that bone pin projectiles are actually fairly commonly found in the rivers of Florida. So that opens up another great opportunity to test these in the context of actually primitively fishing with these, both on spears and then later bows and arrows. And what we've found without a doubt is these make exceptionally well-performing fishing points. Barbs aren't necessary, as you can either pin the fish down to the bottom, or instead of grabbing the spear or the arrow and pulling, which would pull it out of the fish, you pick it up by doing more of a scooping method, which pushes the projectile further into the fish and then doesn't allow it to get off the end of the spear or the arrow. So barbs are not necessary, and somebody might say, well, why wouldn't you just use a sharpened piece of wood? Well, I've done quite a bit of testing on that as well, and I have yet to actually kill and land a fish with just a sharpened piece of wood, as the wood, even if fire hardened, becomes very soft and rounded, and it just simply doesn't even want to penetrate through the hard scales of a fish. Maybe some really soft-skinned fish like catfish, it would work. I'm sure it's been done, but overall, that really hard tip of bone, antler, or ivory holds up to getting wet and a little bit of abuse going through hard scales, and then retains that tip that's necessary to penetrate the fish rather than just shoving the fish out of the way. So simple sharpened wood tips are really poor and inefficient and would really only work in a pinch. But if you're talking about reliable fishing tips being used over and over and over again, these fit that bill perfectly. So in conclusion, the results seem pretty straightforward. Phenomenal fishing points, and then it would certainly work for a measure of practice or even small game points, but for that matter, so would just sharpened sticks if you're just going to practice or hit a rabbit. I mean, we hit rabbits with blunts all the time, and blunts are sufficient to kill rabbits. Would I take these out hunting any sort of substantially sized game? Certainly not. The preliminary tests, even on a bison carcass, prove that they're really just terrible. And as far as carcass testing goes, if you've watched previous videos, what we think about that is we typically see significantly better penetration on a carcass than we do live animal tests, because carcasses don't have any tension in the muscles. They're just dead sacks of meat. So there's no reaction to the shot. There's no tension in the muscles. So therefore, when you do carcass tests, there is less resistance than in live animal tests. So you typically see greater penetration on the carcass tests. And in this situation, we failed to penetrate sufficiently even into a carcass. So I would personally never take these out against an animal with any significant size. And honestly, even looking at something like the flat-headed peccary, which was maybe on average 55 to 65 pounds, that's comparable to our average size feral hog here in Florida. And honestly, if I had to choose between, do I want to throw an bone, antler, or ivory point at a feral hog versus a stone point, I'm going to pick the stone point every single day of the week. So you can decide for yourself. For me, I love them for fishing. For everything else, not so much.